Hi, folks. My name is Mac Primo. I'm here with Daniel Libeskind and Yama Karim. We're at Studio Libeskind. We're going to talk today a bit about architecture, which makes sense, technology, how the two interface, specifically the role the new HP Z2 Mini has played at the office here at the studio. And then we're going to take some audience questions as well. So while we're having this conversation, please feel free to type in some questions, and we'll take a Q&A in a bit. And then Yama and I are going to talk specifically about one project, the Silk Towers in Saudi Arabia, and then we're going to take a walk through the studio and look at some other projects and stuff. So, but right now I want to talk with you guys and just have a casual conversation. But I want to start with sort of bigger picture. Daniel, tell me, how would you define architecture?
Wow.
It's just a simple question to start. An easy one.
It's architecture. It's us. It's life. It's the sense of who we are, where we are going, where we have been. It's our key orienting point. It's not just dwelling. It's not just being there. It's everything, because architecture gives us the horizon. What compelled you to make this your living, to make this what you do?
You know,
it was a path I followed. I was a professional musician. I always drew, and I loved to paint and so on. And I loved science. I went to Brown School of Science. And those three interests somehow drove me to architecture, which combines music, combines the sciences, and certainly combines art. And because it is a civic art.
Right. And what about, Yama, with you? What compelled you to spend 18 hours a day being an architect?
Those are the light days. I think back a few months ago, Danielle was speaking in Warsaw, and somebody asked his advice. What would you do? What's your advice for somebody who wants to become an architect? And I think what really resonated with me was he said it's important to have drive. More important to have drive than to have a goal. And I realized at that moment I didn't really have a goal to become an architect. I had the drive to make, and somehow that kind of led me into architecture. But it wasn't something where, as a child, I thought, I want to be an architect.
Right. So, if you weren't doing architecture, either one of you, where do you think you'd find yourself? Or is that even?
In a wood shop.
What about you?
No, I think architecture is like, I used to be a virtuoso performer. It is a performance. It is something that is it's a cross-section of eternity. You're connected with the past, you're connected with the future. It's just, I would never do anything else.
Do you have any favorite specific projects now that you are an architect? Are there projects that stick out and that resonate tremendously with you, where that drive really came to fruition and you saw, I guess, what compelled you to become an architect?
Yeah, I think always my favorite project is always the one I'm working on right now, because that's it's about making. It's not necessarily about the legacy of it, and that's important, but it's really about the process of making. I think maybe that's really what's the common denominator. It's like, if I wasn't an architect, I would want to be in some field where it's about making. Most recent, I think the most interesting times are when technology and sort of the gravity of making are kind of in tension.
Right.
And that's where it becomes a really creative process. It's not just letting technology drive the design or just making drive the design. It's that interface. So
in almost no other field is technology as prevalent as an architecture. How do you see, Daniel, how has technology changed the game?
Oh my God. When I think my first buildings, was a Jewish museum in Berlin. I never built even a small building. It was done by hand, with trigonometry, with the logarithm. And I just can't believe that I live in the same world. Now, you can interactive process. We can visualize things that you could have done it with projective geometry or with some very strange techniques, but it would have taken a lifetime. And now we can do it in real time as we develop. So it's really changed the world. It's a wondrous thing. And I'm not just speaking about the HP product, but just the technology that we have gives us that sense of being in a real world in much more visceral sense than just sitting at a desk by yourself.
So it's more than, do you think it's greater than just the speed at which things happen? It's the way of thinking.
It's also the conversation you can have with many people at the same time, with creative people. You can engage everybody. From the client to the genius designers that are here, to incredible technicians, to people who are interested in materials. And you can engage them in a singular conversation that it goes beyond anything you could do by going out on the street and looking into a telephone directory.
Right. Do you think, Yama, that architecture has sort of the responsibility to be the forebearer of that technology or of technology?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if anything, it's driving technology as we speak, because there are certain things that we've always imagined that were not necessarily accessible, and a lot of that is becoming more accessible. For a long time, we considered expression excess because it was inaccessible. It became known as, or became associated with being excessive. And now that sense of expression is much more accessible with technology, because you can actually bring character back, as opposed to stripping it from identity. You're bringing expression back.
That's interesting. So the time, like the apex at which we were almost expressionless in a brutal world, like brutally so, was a time
clinical process.
And now with new technology, expression is coming back into
Absolutely.
play.
It's true, because you can, like if you think of the bow and arrow, if you think of a gun, if you can go, the eye, projecting the eye, now you can project the eye beyond any horizon you can imagine in terms of space and light, and engage it with gravity, engage it in the world culturally. It is really not just a tool, because we are also just part of a developing process that is leading us to some new things. Absolutely.
What are some of those new things? I mean, there's solar panels, a revolutionary idea, a couple decades old, several decades old, right? But like that kind of thought of changing, not just there's an object there, but that object collects energy and disseminates energy. That's a vastly forward-thinking technology. Like the Internet of Things is one that I can think of. How are you guys seeing new technologies play into what you're doing?
Well, you can have an idea. You can close your eyes. Dream of an idea. It's not observable. It's not something that came from somewhere. And you can engage it in the technology that we have here. And that's something unprecedented. We could never have done this before. You can go from a point to a line, to a plane, to space, and then beyond into the dimensions of the city, dimensions of complexity that were unfathomable and really almost impossible for a singular human being to engage in.
I've heard you mention that your desire is to create a space that has never been seen before. And where do you get inspiration for something that hasn't been seen before?
From everywhere. You can get it from a natural, pebble on the ground. You can get it from an old bone of a chicken. You can get it from just looking out at the sky, or looking into someone's eyes, or thinking of the history of where you've been and the city you've been in. It's ever present. I think inspiration is just everywhere. It's for free.
Are my eyes inspiring you?
I actually have been looking here at the model, but you are inspiring with your questions, definitely, for sure.
It's also the way, I think, like Danielle always says, every project is like a child. Every project is new. So you find new spaces because we don't rely on repeating our old projects. Every project begins anew. So there's at least the ambition of discovering something new in every project, and not just relying on things that we've already done.
Sure, but that's got to be challenging because you're also celebrated for what you do so well. There's a distinct quality to what comes out of the studio. But so how do you innovate, but at the same time stay, I guess, reverent to your successes, your qualities, and what you've learned?
Well, you have to be true to yourself. You have to do what you believe in. You have to do it, because you love to do it, and you believe it's the right project, it's the right thing to do. And you can't get away from that. Even if you do all sorts of things, you wind up doing something much deeper than just the project, because you're exploring a singular project, actually. I mean, if you read a great writer or a great composer's music, they are exploring a singular thing. It has many variations. There are many aspects to a composition, but it is a project in itself. That work.
A good time to take some questions from the folks who've written in. Tyler is asking, how does it feel to walk through and see one of the buildings you've designed after it's been built?
It's always an incredible experience, because no matter how well you know the project in its virtual form, there is nothing to replace the earth, the sky, gravity, all those things. There is no way to simulate them, because it has to do with you and with every person who enters a building. That's something of a miracle in architecture, that whatever you do, however many tools you have to simulate, at the end, it's about the human soul. You have to be there. And I'm always, amazed how reality takes over from all the things you've done before reality. And of course, there's always an element, never of surprise, because you've designed it. You can't differ from what you intended. But there is that moment that it is real.
When it becomes real. It's got to be like nothing else. What about for you?
And like Danielle said, I mean, it's there is something very known. We use technology to simulate and approximate as close as possible, but there's no replacement for the actual experience. That's unpredictable, and that would change even from day to day. Like going to the same building on a different time of the year, a different time of the day changes.
Sure.
Or with a different mindset. Or with a different mindset.
Exactly. Or the interaction of the people, the people actually using it, they transform the projects.
It's true. I've often entered buildings that I thought kind of I knew and were in the background, and then suddenly I discovered something about a building that I never knew, and suddenly the building struck me as something incredible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Or the most surprising sometimes is like, wow, that really worked.
Oh, right.
Never been tried, but it worked.
It's not an abstraction.
Gyro, pardon me for butchering your name, is asking, how is the relationship between technology and the environment in each one of Studio Libeskin projects? So, and within all your projects, what is the relationship between technology and environment? Do you make that a hallmark of each project you're working with?
Well, we always start by drawing by hand. It's something primitive. It looks kind of ancient, but it starts with that gesture, and then of course it's engaged into small physical models. Something very modest. Then it is engaged in the full, matrix of technology, and then it of course changes because you discover things that you never knew about that initial gesture, and then
absolutely. I mean, it's not linear. So I mean, it starts with drawings, goes into computers, comes back, goes into physical models, and back to hand drawing. So it's a very iterative process. There's really no set formula for how you get there, and so it's staying nimble and using every resource and every medium possible.
Right. It's true. Right. I mean, technology is a tool. It is like a pencil. It doesn't produce the building, but you have to know how to use the technology in order to produce something that you want to do.
Right.
John is asking, Daniel, in one of your TED Talks you talked about architecture as a profession that believes in the future. In what specific way do you feel that how do you believe in the future?
Well, I believe, you might see all sorts of signs around you that might disappoint you, but I believe in the future, particularly in America, because it's a country of possibilities. It's been founded not as a nation, but as an idea of freedom, as an idea of liberty. And to me, that's the greatest idea that can be. We search for freedom in everything we do. Whether, we have to design a modest house that's got 4 walls, got a window and a door, but still you search, where is the freedom to design something that has never been done with a room, with a window, with a door? And I think that's why I'm an eternal optimist. I'm not swayed by momentary changes of politics.
That's important because, as you always say, you can't be an architect as a pessimist.
That's true.
You have to believe in the future as an architect. Otherwise, you wouldn't be.
Yes.
You wouldn't build.
Most of your work lives in the future.
It's absolutely. It's the condition sine qua non.
James has a question. Says, how has your design process evolved through the years? Has technology played a pivotal role?
Definitely. I think we would not be able to do the buildings that we do or the plans without the technology we have. Because you could have maybe dreamt about it, but you could have never done it in time, never done it technically as an accomplishment, and never done it on budget. That's also part of the...
Absolutely.
So it's breaking down barriers. It's getting out of the way of the thought process.
Absolutely. And making it more transparent and more democratic, because we can involve everybody, including the clients, in knowing exactly what is behind and what is in front, and there's no obscurity, really.
Yeah, and it's bringing back individuality. It's humanizing the process of design as opposed to, stripping it from identity. So now we can actually customize our designs, customize spaces without thinking that would be too extravagant. It's not. It's actually very accessible now.
That's interesting to think that a ubiquitous form such as technology, and it evokes more individual thought. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
And Martin has a question. How is Libeskin Studios socially committed to the users and the public?
Well, without public space, that's number one in all our projects. Even if you do a house, it's about the public space. More than that, we are investigating very seriously affordable housing, which is a global need. Not the 1% that can afford luxuries, but people should be able to live in dignified, beautiful quarters with nature, and that's one of our challenges. We build a lot of buildings which are very modest, on low budgets, but buildings that deliver something to people that is memorable and is sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always say architecture is always public, regardless of its use. Whether it's a private development or a public development, it's always public. Everyone occupies architecture. And it affects not just the people that inhabit it and the people around it. So we always look at the impact outside of it, the building, and what it creates.
By its very nature, it's the most democratic of all the arts.
Exactly.
I mean, you're responsible. You have to have a license to sign but you are delivering something which is part of public space.
Right.
And therefore, it's the public. It's the art of the public. It's a
Invariably.
civic art, invariably, as opposed to a painting, a poem, a piece of music which can be played in a private, public manner. This is really open to everyone.
Yeah.
And that's what you think about when you design.
It's in space. It's
It's in space, and it's in the cosmos.
It's so public that sometimes people forget that they are part of architecture and that they're surrounded by
Sure.
architecture
But for
or
you,
shaped
that's your
by it.
primary. I mean, the people inform the entire process.
Yeah.
Well, without being socially aware about culture across time, and I don't mean just present so-called users, but everyone who's implicated in anything that you do in the ground. Look, at Ground Zero, nobody declared this a sacred space. It was just a piece of real estate, but we felt that we have to address the public need.
Right.
Yeah.
This is our last question here from Miriam. She asks, Daniel, can you please talk more about the relationship between your amazing drawings and your architecture?
Well, thank you. I try to use those drawings, architecture. It's not very easy. Sometimes I fail to use them, but I always do drawings that go beyond what can be inserted into technology, and then try to see how the technology can veer itself and slide in order to produce something that I had in mind in a drawing that was never really practical. So it was not drawn for a building.
You use drawings as a tool to sort of reinform yourself.
Even more, I use the drawing as a source of the space, but I cannot always instrumentalize the drawing. I try, and I think we are making progress. It's slow progress. You learn.
But they creep into the work. They sometimes, it's not the sort of the concerted effort to incorporate the drawing. The drawing actually is there.
Right.
Because like Danielle's saying, you can't block yourself. You can't block who you are and what you do and what you produce.
Right.
So they emerge in mysterious ways sometimes, but they're always there.
Yeah,
It's true.
as an underpinning. That's great. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I know
Thank you
you
so much.
have some buildings
Thank you.
to go design.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to
Thank
talk
you.
more about
Great,
some
fantastic.
specific projects.
Okay, have fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I want to talk to you about the Silk Towers in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Tell me about where they are. What's the context for
The
this?
context is actually more and more we're finding with urbanization that you're creating context from scratch sometimes. So this is really a whole new city, a whole new community that's being developed and designed. And in cases like this, in this particular project, it was really about how to manage density in how to create a more responsible kind of use of the site. So rather than multiple buildings that really kind of spread and limit light, air, and views for its inhabitants, we actually chose to sort of create 2 towers instead of what was originally envisioned as like 4 structures.
Okay.
So in this case, building higher was actually the most responsible way of distributing that area. It wasn't just about showing a more strengthened or a more powerful form. It was really about a more responsible kind of distribution of space.
Sure, vertical.
Yeah, going vertical.
Yeah. And this whole project is all on the HP Z2 Mini.
Absolutely.
How did it hold up?
Great.
Relative to like a traditional tower.
Great. I mean, we really test it because, especially in our residential projects, we firmly believe in expression of the individual units as opposed to being one of 400 units.
Right.
We want every single unit to have something unique, something that's sort of custom made for each unit, that they feel they're part of their own geometry, they're part of their own space, not just simply stacked on top. So that makes our geometries much more complex. A lot of design. A lot of information, a lot of input, a lot of difference, a lot of nuance. and we haven't reached the limit with it yet.
That's
and
right.
this is a pretty complex and pretty sizable project. So.
And the software usage is the same, it handles all the same software as the
Absolutely.
traditional tower?
Yeah, absolutely. It has
prettier, that's for sure.
It's definitely prettier. Takes a lot less space.
Yeah.
Lot more leg room, and like we've been told, and it really works. It's really quiet.
Yeah.
It's very quiet because I actually just learned this earlier that one of the reasons computers become loud is because they're on the floor and they're collecting dust.
Oh, right.
And then the computers run hotter and louder,
The fan.
and just that little shift
Yeah.
from the ground to the tabletop
Yeah.
changes.
The architect
the
people are
technology.
kind of intense too. The quiet's probably pretty important to you.
It is, yes. Sometimes we can be antisocial.
So I want to talk, it was fascinating what you're talking about, the cultural, sort of
Yeah.
creating context and the cultural context. What is this specific area like? What is Jeddah like? New Men.
This is actually a new development in Jeddah. So
okay.
this really is a new city.
Right.
It's a new development, and it's connected to all this new sort of new generation of people that want to live in a different style or in a different pattern, in a different kind of environment.
Yeah.
So this is it's at all levels. It's sort of middle income to the highest level of luxury. But in all cases, it's always the common denominator is that it's about creating mixed uses and creating an urban community.
What are some of the things that go into this design? Because I know that there's these are wildly expressive shapes, which is a hallmark of the studio.
Yes.
There's nothing that's arbitrary.
They're wildly expressive, but in a very specific way.
What is that specificity?
So
What
that
are-
specificity
what are we
has
seeing?
basically taking the constraints of the site and using those constraints to shape the building in a very particular way. So the way they're twisting away from each other is precisely to create more light and more views and reduce the overlapping. And the way they kind of have a dialogue with one another is to actually create two individual towers with their own identity, but they also have a dialogue with one another. It's kind of like a couple, like a dance. So the rotation away, it's all towards views. And the rotation away from each other is all towards creating the maximum distance and privacy from one another.
Right.
And you'll notice, like, for example, that the proudest moment in these expressions, which are offset, are actually have the greatest distance between them.
Sure.
So it's
Right.
that sculpting. It's not just simply about shaping. It's also about creating vistas. Yeah. So there's a dialogue, but but the expression and the rotation is very specific to the site.
Your contractors are going to love you.
We've actually had it's one of the things that we do always when we're trying to bring in that level of detail into the project is that we do it in a very responsible way. So we're doing it with basically a second skin. It's a kind of a screen. It's not the building envelope, so that you're not really affecting the building envelope. That's much more rigorous and much more predictable. And you're doing it with the second skin, not just for the expression, but also because that second skin has a performance quality
Well,
here.
the second skin now, if you talk about this now versus like 15, 20 years ago, there's a functionality to materials.
Absolutely.
That's just so different.
But it also ties into the specific context and climate here, because it's not a glass tower from Frankfurt. This is a high-rise building in a pretty hot climate that also has a lot of dust and a lot of heat, and so that second skin becomes this protective barrier, and not just formal expression, but also a performative expression.
Cool.
It's a dress on the building that is in tune with that climate.
Sure. I would love to see some more projects and talk about the studio.
Absolutely.
Great.
So we're a studio because we don't have offices. It's open, completely no hierarchy, but we have project-specific teams. People share. We share resources from different teams based on need, but everyone's really into everyone else's projects. So we don't have compartments or departments in that respect.
Open plan so everyone can see everyone.
Exactly. So these are some of the recent projects that we've been working on, specifically on the HPZ2 Mini. And so these are really
This one I know.
This
we
one
just
you
talked
know.
about that. And then we've got different, these all, they have a hallmark to them, but at the same time look very different. Tell me, this one's really interesting. specifically, I've
In
read about
Toulouse.
this in Toulouse.
Yes.
Because there are no skyscrapers in Toulouse, right?
There are no
Right.
skyscrapers in Toulouse, and it's not just about building a skyscraper. It's also about a new urban pattern, which is bringing people back into cities, concentrating back onto density and mixed-use uses. We've learned that horizontal sprawl it's not just about showing power, it's about building responsibly,
Right.
especially when it comes to like using resources like land, reducing footprints, going vertically.
Right.
These are all things we've learned that are actually good for urbanism.
Interesting. Cool. Let's go over and see some of the models, because those are beautiful and represent some of the stuff that you have gotten to a further state of completion.
Sure.
Like this one, I
Yes.
think we all know this one, or
Yes.
I know it very. I know it
We
very
all
well.
know it.
I've
We
watched the entire
lived
process.
with it, and
I
we'll
live,
continue to
I
live
live
with
right
it.
there.
Yeah, me too. I can see it from my house.
So tell me what this is.
Well, this is the original master plan for Ground Zero. This is the sort of the foundation of what's being constructed today. It's not about the specifics of the design of each tower. It's about how to reorganize and rebuild the site. And not just rebuild it in terms of remaking up the space that was lost, but rebuild it so that it's actually reconnected to the city fabric by bringing streets back, creating public space.
Yeah, because this. What's interesting about this is you're kind of almost designing a neighborhood.
Exactly.
It's such a big. This has got to be the biggest site you guys have.
It's just this site alone is bigger than many financial centers
Yeah.
in major cities.
That's incredible. So
Yeah.
you really are designing an area.
Yeah,
It's not
an area.
buildings. It's an area.
Absolutely,
That's
and we
fascinating.
wanted it to be lived. We
Yeah.
wanted it to be used, not just for commemoration, not just for offices, but everyday users.
Yeah.
People shopping, people wanting to go have a lunch,
Yeah.
people doing everyday activities.
I mean, it's a big site, literally and figuratively, and just in terms of what it means. So staying reverent to that, but also creating a new space that can move forward is very important.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that was really important for
Yeah.
us. I mean, especially in a city like New York.
Yeah, yeah. And what's this one
This
here?
is the Grand Canal Theater. It's another example of how cities are moving on.
Where is this?
It's in Dublin, Ireland. And these were the old docklands in Dublin. So obviously that kind of industry, that industrialism is moved on and
Sure.
is sort of repurposing and bringing this back into the city.
What was the neighborhood like before this went in? Was
Industrial,
it? It was
completely
totally
industrial.
industrial.
Yeah,
Okay.
completely industrial.
So not only the
So
building,
docks.
but making this an arts center is kind of a new.
It's a performing arts center, but not just creating a district that is specific to one use, but also bringing everyday life to it.
So these aren't- this is the stage, and these are
office buildings, and Google has moved into them.
Oh, wow.
And so
I've heard of
these are
Google.
really yes, some of us have. This is our first performing arts center.
That's the first one that
First
Libeskin
one that we've done,
Wow.
and most people are surprised. I mean, given Danielle's background in
Sure.
music and performance, sometimes people are like, "Well, how many have you done?"
Sure.
Well, this was our first, and
That's
we
exciting.
saw that as an advantage,
How
not as
is
a
that an
handicap. Well,
advantage?
because sometimes we're too tied to the idea that experience builds knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does, but experience can also create baggage. And so we felt
Mm-hmm. Right.
like we had a fresh eye, we had a fresh perspective on seeing, re-envisioning the theater, that
Yeah.
it wasn't just about the enclosed black box, it was also about the public spectacle.
Right.
So this glass curtain where you're actually seeing the users, the
Yeah.
ritual, that becomes a theater in itself.
That's
onto
cool.
this public plaza.
Well, that's also. I mean, to have that. It seems appropriate for something that's a performing arts to have that
Yeah.
sort of like first time nervous
and
jitters, almost
yeah, exactly.
stage fright. That's great. Cool. Let's talk about this one. This is. So this is in Ottawa, correct?
this
And
is
this
in
is
Memorial in Ottawa.
the Holocaust
Yeah,
Memorial.
the Holocaust Memorial, currently under construction.
Mm-hmm.
As you can see, there's definite symbolism that's
Yes.
important to us. And that's definitely something Danielle is really inspired by, is to understand not just the shape, but its association, what the Star of David meant.
And
at
that's
that
what
time.
looking at this shape
Yes.
from overhead. What we're seeing
Yeah, so you
is
see
a-
almost a kind of a jarred remnants
Mm-hmm.
of a Star of David that's been kind of displaced. And so, but
in its
at the-
structure, in its building,
and its
it
building and
represented
its
the
structure. You don't
displacement, yeah.
necessarily feel it when you're there. It's more experiential.
Right. You don't see it when you because it's. I mean, being down in there, you wouldn't necessarily see.
You're right.
Even that it is
Right, but
extrapolated
it changes
from
your
the Star of
horizon.
David.
These tilted
Right.
planes, these intersections. It actually it questions your context.
Right.
So it's really it's our idea of memorials isn't to necessarily create objects, it's to create an experience.
Right, right.
And that you feel the impact through that experience,
Sure.
through occupying the space, and that ultimately these are public spaces.
And when is this for?
This is
Scheduled
due
for
for completion next year. Cool. Yeah.
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
thank you very
absolutely.
much for taking us through all this. I really
Absolutely,
appreciate
my
it. It's
pleasure.
been wonderful. And if you guys want to learn more about what Libeskin Studios are working on, you can visit Libeskin.com. And also to learn more about the HP Z2 Mini, check out hp.com/go/Z2 Mini. Bye-bye.